Blood dripped from Sarah Thornton's trembling hands as she clutched her 4 terrified children in the shadows, while outside, the Apache warrior's knife claimed another bandit's life in her name. The salvation he offered meant taking her family to his village, where tribal elders waited with cold eyes and demands that would forever alter their destiny. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Blood dripped from Sarah Thornton's trembling hands as she clutched her 4 terrified children in the shadows, while outside, the Apache warrior's knife claimed another bandit's life in her name. The salvation he offered meant taking her family to his village, where tribal elders waited with cold eyes and demands that would forever alter their destiny. Sarah Thornton studied the Apache warrior standing before her, his features cast in sharp relief by the fading daylight. Every instinct told her to shut the door, to barricade herself and her children inside what little shelter they had found. The newspapers back east had been filled with stories about the Apache, brutal tales of raids and violence that painted them as savages to be feared. Yet there was something in this man's steady gaze that gave her pause, dignity, purpose, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Mama," whispered Emma, her 10-year-old daughter, tugging at her skirt. "I'm scared." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, never taking her eyes off Swift Arrow. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The Apache gestured to the horizon. "Night comes soon. The Reyes gang. They drink and celebrate now. When darkness is complete, they will sleep heavy. I can recover what was taken." "By yourself?" Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. She had seen the gang, at least 8 men, all armed, all dangerous. Swift Arrow's expression didn't change. "I do not fight them directly. I take back what is yours while they sleep." The oldest boy, James, stepped forward again. "I want to come with you. Those men killed my father. They burned our home." "No." Both Sarah and Swift Arrow spoke simultaneously. Swift Arrow looked at the boy with what might have been respect. "Your place is here, protecting your mother and the young ones. This is not your fight today." Sarah felt a strange rush of gratitude at the warrior's words. James had been trying so hard to fill his father's shoes since William's death, carrying a burden no child should bear. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, looking back at the dilapidated interior of the mining outpost. "The roof leaks, and we have almost no food left." "We were trying to make it to Phoenix, where my cousin lives." Swift Arrow nodded. "After I return with your belongings, I will guide you to safety." "Why would you risk your life for us?" Sarah asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he first offered help. For a long moment, Swift Arrow was silent, his gaze drifting to the children. "There has been too much suffering in these lands. Too many innocent ones paying the price." His eyes met hers again. "Some things are worth the risk." Something in his words, in the quiet conviction behind them, made Sarah's decision. She opened the door wider. "Come inside before the light fades completely. We have little to offer, but you should rest before you go." The interior of the outpost was sparse, a single room with a collapsed table in one corner, a rusted cast-iron stove, and bedrolls made from the few blankets the family had managed to grab as they fled their burning home. The youngest boy, Thomas, stared openly at Swift Arrow as he ducked through the doorway, his small face a mixture of curiosity and lingering fear. "Are you really an Indian?" he asked, his child's voice cutting through the tension. "Thomas!" Sarah scolded gently. "That's not polite." But Swift Arrow had already crouched down to the boy's level, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I am Apache," he said simply. My people have lived in these lands since before memory. Thomas's eyes widened. Oh, did you ever kill anyone with that? He asked, pointing to the knife sheathed at Swift Arrow's hip. Thomas, that's enough questions, Sarah interjected firmly, shooting Swift Arrow an apologetic look. The warrior straightened, something like understanding in his eyes. Children ask what adults dare not, he said. It is their way. Sarah busied herself with what remained of their supplies, a small bag of cornmeal, a few strips of dried beef, a canteen half full of water. We don't have much, but you're welcome to share our meal. As she worked, Sarah felt Swift Arrow's eyes on her, assessing, perhaps wondering how a woman with 4 children had ended up in such desperate circumstances. She had asked herself the same question countless times over the past few days. It had all happened so quickly. William's decision to move west from Pennsylvania had been driven by dreams of building a better life for their family. The modest inheritance from her parents had purchased the small ranch north of Phoenix, and for almost a year, things had been good. Difficult, yes. The land was unforgiving, but they had been making it work. Then the Reyes gang had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Sarah had been in the garden with little Thomas and 6-year-old Catherine when the shots rang out. William had shouted for her to run, to take the children and hide. She had grabbed Thomas and Catherine, calling frantically for James and Emma, who had been collecting eggs from the chicken coop. The last image she had of her husband was him standing on their porch, rifle in hand, as smoke began to billow from the barn. Mrs. Thornton. Swift Arrow's voice pulled her from the painful memory. He had moved to the single window, peering out at the darkening landscape. What items did these men take that are most important to you? Sarah wiped a hand across her eyes. There's a wooden box with a brass lock. It contains all our money, the deed to our land, William's pocket watch. It was his father's. Her voice caught. And my mother's locket with a picture of my parents inside. The children have nothing else to remember their grandparents by. Swift Arrow nodded once. And I will find these things. As the makeshift meal was prepared, Swift Arrow spoke quietly with James, asking him details about the gang, how many men, what weapons they carried, which one appeared to be the leader. The boy answered as best he could, his young face solemn with the responsibility. Catherine, the 6-year-old, had gradually moved closer to Swift Arrow throughout the evening, her initial fear giving way to curiosity. Now she sat nearby, watching him with wide eyes. Your hair is longer than Mama's, she observed suddenly. A ghost of a smile touched Swift Arrow's lips. Apache warriors wear their hair long. It is our way. It's pretty, Catherine decided, earning a surprised laugh from Sarah. As the last light faded from the sky, Swift Arrow rose. I will go now. The darkness will hide me, and the men will be deep in their cups. Sarah stood as well, suddenly anxious. Be careful. These men, they're dangerous. They killed without hesitation. Swift Arrow's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. I will return before dawn. Keep the children quiet. If danger comes, there is a place to hide beneath the floorboards in the corner. He pointed to a section of the floor where the boards looked slightly different. As he moved to the door, James stepped forward, holding out a small carved wooden horse. My father made this for me, he said, his voice tight with emotion. For luck. Swift Arrow looked at the boy for a long moment, then accepted the talisman with a solemn nod. I will return it to you with the rest of your belongings. And then he was gone, melting into the darkness like a shadow, leaving Sarah and her children to wait through the long night ahead. The night embraced Swift Arrow like an old friend as he moved through the desert landscape. The moon hung thin and sharp in the sky, providing just enough light to navigate by without betraying his presence to unfriendly eyes. His body remembered this, the silent hunt, the measured breath, the heightened awareness where every sense became a weapon and a shield. He had left his rifle hidden near the mining outpost, taking only his knife and a short length of rawhide cord. The Winchester was powerful, but useless for the task ahead. Tonight called for silence, for the Apache way of moving unseen through enemy territory. The small wooden horse James had given him was tucked securely in the leather pouch at his waist. Its weight was negligible, yet Swift Arrow felt it like a stone, a reminder of the trust placed in him by a fatherless boy and his desperate family. He had not planned to involve himself in the affairs of settlers. His purpose in tracking the Reyes gang had been different. They had crossed Apache lands twice in recent months, leaving death in their wake. The tribal council had sent him to assess the threat, to determine if the gang intended to make further incursions into their territory. Finding Sarah Thornton and her children had changed everything. The Reyes gang's camp came into view after an hour of careful travel, a collection of bedrolls around a dying fire, horses picketed nearby, the glint of bottles reflecting moonlight. Swift Arrow counted 8 men, just as James had described. Most were sprawled in drunken slumber, though 2 remained sitting by the fire, passing a bottle between them. Swift Arrow settled into a patient crouch behind a large boulder, studying the camp's layout. The stolen goods would be close to Vicente Reyes himself. The leader always claimed the best spoils. James had described him, a big man with a scar running from his left eye to his mouth, wearing a distinctive silver-trimmed sombrero. It didn't take long to spot him, the largest bedroll, set slightly apart from the others, the infamous sombrero resting beside his head. Near him lay several bundles and what appeared to be a small wooden chest, likely containing the Thorntons' valuables. Swift Arrow waited, measuring time by the movement of stars overhead. Eventually, the last 2 men succumbed to their liquor and collapsed by the dying fire. He gave them another half-hour to fall into deeper sleep before making his move. He approached from downwind, placing each foot with deliberate precision. The horses sensed him first. One lifted its head, nostrils flaring. Swift Arrow froze, then made a soft sound deep in his throat that seemed to reassure the animal. It lowered its head again, returning to its dozing. 15 more careful steps brought him to the edge of the camp. 20 more, and he stood beside the pile of stolen goods near Reyes. The outlaw's heavy breathing indicated deep sleep, his massive chest rising and falling beneath a filthy blanket. The stench of whiskey and unwashed body rose from him like a cloud. Swift Arrow knelt slowly, examining the items without touching them, a wooden chest with brass fittings, bundles of clothing, a saddle that must have belonged to William Thornton, various household items of little value but much meaning to a family that had lost everything else. With movement slower than a desert tortoise, Swift Arrow lifted the wooden chest. It was locked, just as Sarah had described. Good, the contents would still be inside. He carefully placed it inside a saddlebag he'd brought for this purpose, then began selecting other items that seemed most personal. A man's coat, a small bundle of children's clothing, a well-worn Bible. As he reached for what appeared to be a lady's shawl, Vicente Reyes grunted and rolled onto his side. Swift Arrow went perfectly still, not even breathing, his hands suspended in mid-air. The outlaw muttered something in Spanish, then resumed his heavy breathing. Sweat beaded on Swift Arrow's brow despite the cool night air. He waited 3 more heartbeats before continuing. The pocket watch was the last item he found, tucked into Reyes' own vest, which lay crumpled beside the bedroll. Swift Arrow extracted it with the delicacy of a man plucking a spine from a cactus fruit. As he secured the final item, a voice suddenly cut through the night. "Quien anda ahí?" One of the men had risen to relieve himself and spotted movement. Swift Arrow didn't hesitate. He melted into the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter, just as the man stumbled toward Reyes, kicking his leader awake. Someone was here. "I saw someone buy your things." Chaos erupted in the camp, men lurching to their feet, reaching for weapons, shouting curses as they tripped over each other in the darkness. Swift Arrow was already 50 yards away, moving swiftly but silently through the desert scrub, the precious saddlebag secure across his back. A shot rang out, the bullet whining harmlessly into the night sky. More shouting followed, then the sounds of men stumbling around the perimeter of their camp, searching blindly in the darkness. Swift Arrow permitted himself a small smile as he put distance between himself and the confused outlaws. By the time they organized themselves enough for a proper search, he would be long gone, leaving no trail to follow. The journey back to the mining outpost took longer than his approach to the camp. He moved with greater caution, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't being followed. The stolen items were a solid weight against his back, each step bringing him closer to fulfilling his promise to Sarah and her children. As he traveled, Swift Arrow found his thoughts returning to the family waiting for him. There was something about them, about her, that stirred memories he'd long kept buried. Sarah's quiet strength reminded him of his own mother, killed during a cavalry attack on their village 15 winters ago. Her children's fear-bright eyes recalled too many Apache children he'd seen orphaned by violence. Perhaps that was why he had stopped, why he had offered help instead of simply continuing his mission. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had lost much yet refused to surrender to despair. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Swift Arrow approached the mining outpost. The saddlebag of recovered treasures secure in his grasp, and James's wooden horse still safely tucked against his heart. Dawn painted the desert in shades of amber and rose as Swift Arrow approached the mining outpost. The silence surrounding the dilapidated structure sent a spike of concern through him, until he spotted the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, so faint it would be invisible to any eye less trained than his own. Sarah was being cautious, keeping the fire small to avoid detection. He paused at the edge of the clearing, listening. No unusual sounds, no sign of the Reyes gang having discovered this hiding place. Still, caution had kept him alive through many dangers. He circled the outpost once, examining the ground for any tracks that might have appeared during his absence. Finding none, he finally approached the door and gave a soft, distinctive knock. The response was immediate. A shuffle of movement inside, followed by the sound of a makeshift barricade being moved away from the door. It opened a crack, and James's anxious face appeared, brightening instantly at the sight of Swift Arrow. "You came back." The boy pushed the door wider, his voice carrying the relief of someone who hadn't been certain of seeing another dawn. Swift Arrow stepped inside, his eyes adjusting quickly to the dim interior. Sarah stood by the stove, Catherine and Emma huddled close to her skirts. Little Thomas still asleep on a bedroll in the corner. The tension in Sarah's shoulders visibly released at his return, though she tried to mask it with practicality. "You're unharmed?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "They did not see me clearly," Swift Arrow confirmed, lowering the saddlebag to the rough wooden floor. "And I brought what was taken." The children gathered around as he opened the bag, their eyes wide with anticipation. Swift Arrow removed the wooden chest first, placing it carefully before Sarah. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a small key from a cord around her neck and unlocked it, revealing the family's modest savings, land deed, and a few pieces of jewelry. "Thank God," she whispered, touching the papers reverently. Next came the clothing. William's coat, which James immediately pulled to his chest, burying his face in the fabric that still carried his father's scent. Emma claimed a blue shawl with delicate embroidery, while Catherine found a rag doll she'd thought lost forever. "My pocket watch," Sarah exclaimed as Swift Arrow produced it from the depths of the bag. But William's father carried this through the entire Civil War. She ran her thumb over the worn silver case before pressing it into James's palm. "This is yours now, son. Your father would want you to have it." The boy's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he closed his fingers around the heirloom, but he maintained his composure, nodding solemnly. Finally, Swift Arrow withdrew a small golden locket. This was in a separate pouch in the outlaw leader's vest. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "My mother's locket. I thought surely it was gone forever." She took it with reverence, opening it to reveal tiny painted portraits of an older couple. "My parents," she explained, showing the images to Swift Arrow. "They never got to meet Thomas or Catherine. They died of fever back east before we moved west." Swift Arrow studied the faces in the locket, a stern-looking man with kind eyes and a woman whose smile reminded him of Sarah's. He understood then why this small item held such importance. It was more than gold and paint. It was memory, connection, proof that those who came before had once lived and loved. After the initial excitement of the reunion with their possessions subsided, Sarah set about preparing a meager breakfast with their dwindling supplies. Swift Arrow declined her offer to share, instead moving to the doorway to scan the horizon. "The men will be searching," he said, watching the rising sun cast long shadows across the desert floor. "They will be angry. This place is not safe now." Sarah nodded, her momentary joy fading as reality reasserted itself. "We still need to reach Phoenix. My cousin Daniel runs a general store there. He'll take us in until we can..." She trailed off, the enormity of rebuilding their lives from almost nothing momentarily overwhelming her. Swift Arrow considered her words carefully before responding. "Phoenix is 4 days' journey on foot. The Reyes gang has horses. They will patrol the main trails." "So we're trapped," Sarah said, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear the desperation in it. "There is another option," Swift Arrow said after a long pause. "My village lies 2 days' journey from here, in the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains. You would be safe there until the outlaws move on." Sarah's eyes widened. "Your village?" "You would take us to your people. It is not without risk," he admitted. "Some will not welcome outsiders, but others will understand. Our medicine woman, Singing Bird, she has spoken of building peace between our peoples. And my word carries weight with the council." Sarah looked at her children, James listening intently to the conversation, Emma and Catherine sharing the single cup of water they had left, Thomas still sleeping, exhausted from days of fear and deprivation. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked, echoing her question from the previous day, still unable to fully comprehend why this warrior had taken such risks for her family. Swift Arrow's gaze drifted to the children before returning to meet her eyes. "Many winters ago, soldiers came to my first village. They did not see women and children. They saw only enemies." His voice remained steady, but Sarah could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I was hunting. When I returned, there was only ash and death. My wife, my son, just beginning to walk." Sarah's hand moved involuntarily to her heart. "I'm so sorry." Swift Arrow nodded once, accepting her sympathy without allowing himself to dwell in the past. No child should be without protection. No mother should face such danger alone. He gestured to the barren landscape outside. "This land has seen too much death. Perhaps it is time it witnessed some mercy instead." The simplicity of his words, the quiet dignity with which he spoke of unimaginable loss, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting the children to see her moment of weakness. "If your village is our best chance, then we gratefully accept," she said, straightening her shoulders. "What do we need to do?" "We leave within the hour," Swift Arrow replied. "Travel light. Bring only what cannot be replaced." He withdrew James's carved wooden horse from his pouch and returned it to the boy. "Was your father's good luck charm served well?" James took it reverently. "Thank you," he said, his young voice solemn. "For everything." Swift Arrow inclined his head in acknowledgement, then turned back to Sarah. "The journey will not be easy. There is little water, and we must avoid open spaces during daylight." "We'll manage," Sarah assured him, already beginning to gather their most essential belongings. "We've come this far." As Swift Arrow watched her efficient movements, her gentle guidance of her children as they prepared for the journey ahead, he felt a sense of certainty settle over him. Whatever reception awaited them at his village, he had made the right decision. Some actions transcended the boundaries between peoples. Some choices answered to a higher law than man's. Outside, the desert shimmered under the strengthening sun, indifferent to the small human drama unfolding within the walls of the abandoned mining outpost. But within those walls, something profound had shifted. Trust had been given and received, and with it, the first fragile strands of a bond neither Sarah nor Swift Arrow had anticipated when dawn broke the previous day. The journey through the Arizona wilderness tested every member of the small party. Swift Arrow led them through routes no wagon trail ever touched, narrow ravines where shadow offered precious relief from the punishing sun, dry creek beds that wound like serpents between towering rock formations, hidden passages that only those born to this harsh land could recognize. Sarah carried Thomas when his small legs could walk no further, the boy's arms wrapped trustingly around her neck despite the sweat that dampened both their skin. James insisted on helping, taking turns with the bundle of their salvaged possessions, his young shoulders squared with determination. Emma and Catherine trudged along without complaint. Though their city-bred feet had long since developed blisters inside their inadequate shoes, Swift Arrow watched them with growing respect. These were not the soft settlers he had sometimes observed from a distance, those who complained bitterly about the land's challenges while attempting to bend it to their will. The Thornton family adapted, endured, pressed forward, like the Apache. By midday of their first day of travel, when the sun sat like a molten copper disk in the cloudless sky, Swift Arrow led them to a hidden spring, a small miracle of water seeping from a rock face, creating a shallow pool beneath an overhang of stone. "Rest here," he instructed, helping Emma lower herself to sit on a smooth boulder. "Water is life in this land." "And drink slowly." Sarah watched as he showed the children how to cup their hands beneath the trickling spring, how to sip rather than gulp the precious liquid. The simple lesson reflected a lifetime of desert wisdom. "Thank you," she said when he brought water to her, their fingers brushing momentarily as she accepted his cupped hands. "I don't know if we would have survived another day in that outpost." Swift Arrow merely nodded, but something in his dark eyes acknowledged her gratitude. They rested for an hour in the blessed shade of the overhang, the children dozing while Sarah tended to their blistered feet, applying a salve Swift Arrow had produced from a small pouch at his waist. "A medicine from the desert," he explained when she asked about the green paste that smelled of sage and another scent she couldn't identify. "Singing bird taught me its making." "Your medicine woman." Sarah recalled him mentioning the name earlier. "She's very old now. Her knowledge is vast, but her body grows weak." A shadow passed over his features. She is the one who found me after the soldiers came. She saved me from the darkness that wanted to claim my spirit. Sarah sensed there was more to this story, something personal that connected Swift Arrow to this elder, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Will she help us when we reach your village?" "Singing bird sees with a heart unclouded by fear or hatred," he replied. Adul, but others may not share her vision. The second day of travel brought them into higher country, the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains rising before them like ancient guardians of stone. The terrain grew more challenging, but also more forgiving in its offerings of shade and occasional water. James had taken to walking beside Swift Arrow whenever the path allowed, listening intently as the Apache pointed out signs of wildlife, explained which plants could provide food or medicine which were to be avoided. The boy absorbed the knowledge like parched earth soaking up rain. "My father tried to teach me about the land," James said during one such lesson, his voice quiet but steady. He said a man needs to understand the place where he lives." Swift Arrow glanced at the boy. "Your father was wise. He wanted to learn from the people who knew it best." James kicked at a small stone. He said, "White men make the mistake of thinking they already have all the answers." Swift Arrow said nothing for a long moment, surprised by the sentiment. "And not all see it that way. I know," James replied, his young face suddenly older than his years. "That's why they killed him, isn't it? Because he saw things differently." The question hung in the air between them, a truth too heavy for a child to carry alone. "Some men fear what is different," Swift Arrow finally said. "Fear makes them dangerous. But not all men are ruled by fear." He placed a hand briefly on James's shoulder. "Would remember your father's wisdom. It honors his spirit." As the sun began its descent on the second day, Swift Arrow paused atop a ridge, raising his hand for the others to halt. Below them, nestled in a protected valley where a small stream created a ribbon of green amid the browns and reds of the landscape, lay his village. From this distance, Sarah could make out perhaps 20 dwellings, wickiups made of branches and animal hides arranged in a rough circle. Thin spirals of cooking smoke rose from several fires. Children played near the stream while women worked at various tasks. Men sat in council or tended to weapons and tools. A life not so different from what she had known, Sarah thought, yet wrapped in traditions and knowledge as foreign to her as the stars. "You're home," she said softly, coming to stand beside Swift Arrow. He nodded, but she noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the village with something like uncertainty. "You're worried about bringing us here," she stated, not a question. "My people have suffered much at the hands of white settlers and soldiers," he said, his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "The trust does not come easily. We can find another way," Sarah began, but Swift Arrow shook his head. "This is the right path, but you should know what awaits." He turned to face her fully. "Some will see only your skin, not your heart. They will argue against helping you." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "And what will you tell them?" Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a certainty replacing doubt. "And I will tell them that courage and honor are not the possession of one people alone, that I have seen both in you and your children." The sincerity in his words touched something deep within Sarah, a place that had begun to heal despite all she had lost. "Thank you for taking this risk," she said, "for us." Swift Arrow looked back toward the village, his home and his responsibility. "We go now. Walk tall. Show no fear." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Your children already have the hearts of warriors. Follow their example." With that, he led them down the path toward the village, toward whatever welcome or rejection awaited them among his people. Their approach did not go unnoticed. Before Swift Arrow and the Thorntons had descended halfway down the path to the village, 3 mounted warriors appeared, weapons ready, expressions guarded. They spoke rapidly to Swift Arrow in their native tongue, their eyes never leaving Sarah and the children. Swift Arrow responded calmly, his voice carrying authority despite his outnumbered position. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone of someone standing their ground. James moved closer to her side, instinctively placing himself between his siblings and the mounted warriors. After a tense exchange, one of the warriors turned his horse and galloped toward the village. The other 2 fell in beside Swift Arrow's group, escorting them down the remaining path. Their presence felt less like protection and more like containment. "What did they say?" Sarah asked quietly. "They are surprised," Swift Arrow replied, his expression revealing little. "It is unusual to bring outsiders here." That, Sarah suspected, was a considerable understatement. As they entered the village proper, activity ceased. Women paused in their work, men stood from their tasks, and children stopped playing to stare openly at the newcomers. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft shuffling of the Thorntons, footsteps, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Thomas pressed his face against Sarah's skirts. Emma gripped Catherine's hand tighter. Only James maintained a facade of calm, though Sarah could feel the tension radiating from her eldest son. Swift Arrow led them to the center of the village, where a fire pit lay cold and waiting for the evening meal. Already, several elders had gathered, men with faces lined by sun and experience, women whose bearing spoke of wisdom earned through long lives in a harsh land. One man stepped forward, older than Swift Arrow by perhaps 20 years. His hair streaked with grey, his chest bearing the scars of old battles. The medallions and feathers adorning his clothing marked him as someone of significant standing. His expression was neither welcoming nor overtly hostile, merely assessing. "Black Mountain," Swift Arrow said, inclining his head respectfully. "And I bring those who need shelter." The elder's gaze swept over Sarah and her children before returning to Swift Arrow. "So I see." His English was heavily accented but clear. "You bring pale skins to our home without council approval." "There was no time for council," Swift Arrow replied. "They were in danger. The Reyes gang hunts them." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd at the mention of the notorious outlaws. Black Mountain's expression hardened. "The affairs of settlers and bandits are not our concern." "They murdered her husband," Swift Arrow countered. "Burned their home. They would have killed the children had they found them." Before Black Mountain could respond, the crowd parted to allow the passage of an elderly woman. She moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize, her white hair braided with strands of red and yellow cloth. Despite her apparent frailty, the respect shown to her was immediate and absolute. "Singing bird," Swift Arrow said, his voice softening. The old woman's eyes, bright and clear despite her advanced age, settled first on Swift Arrow, then moved deliberately to each of the Thornton children before finally resting on Sarah. There was something in that gaze that seemed to look beyond surface appearances, probing deeper. "You bring troubled souls to our fire," she said, her English more fluent than Black Mountain's. "And in troubled times. The children needed protection," Swift Arrow answered simply. Singing Bird nodded slowly. "Children always need protection." She approached Sarah without hesitation, her gnarled hand reaching out to touch Sarah's cheek in a gesture that was somehow both intimate and dignified. "You have journeyed far, daughter of another people. Not just in distance, Sarah found herself unable to look away from the old woman's penetrating gaze. "My children and I are grateful for any shelter you might provide," she said carefully. "We won't impose long." Singing Bird's lips curved in a slight smile. "Time has its own measure here." She turned to Swift Arrow. "You were right to bring them." Black Mountain stepped forward. "That is for the council to decide, Grandmother." Singing Bird regarded him with the patient look of one who has seen many councils come and go. "Then let the council gather. But first, these travelers need water, food, and rest." She gestured to a nearby wickiup. "My dwelling has space." The elder began to protest, but Singing Bird silenced him with a raised hand. "Would you deny our oldest laws of hospitality, grandson? Even in times of drought, we do not turn away those in genuine need." Black Mountain's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head in reluctant deference. "The council will meet when the sun touches the western hills," he announced, then turned and walked away, several other men following in his wake. Swift Arrow watched them go, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Singing Bird beckoned to Sarah and the children. "Come. You are safe for now." The old woman's dwelling was larger than it had appeared from a distance, the interior cool and fragrant with hanging bundles of dried herbs and roots. She directed them to sitting mats woven from some kind of grass, then instructed a young woman who had followed them to bring food and water. "Rest now," she told the children, her voice gentle, "and no harm will come to you in my home." Thomas, exhausted beyond fear, was already curling up on one of the mats, his eyelids heavy. Emma and Catherine, taking cues from their mother, politely accepted cups of water from the young woman, who returned with supplies. "Thank you," Sarah said to Singing Bird, as the old woman eased herself down onto a mat near the dwelling's entrance. "For your kindness." Singing Bird studied her thoughtfully. "It is not kindness that motivates all hearts here. Remember that." The warning was clear, but delivered without malice. Sarah nodded her understanding. Swift Arrow remained standing near the entrance, his body tense with unspoken concerns. Singing Bird gestured for him to sit. "The council will have many questions," she said in their native language, which Sarah couldn't understand. "The Black Mountain leads those who see only threat in the outside world." "He has reason," Swift Arrow replied in the same tongue. "We all do." "Yes." Singing Bird's eyes drifted to the children, who were now eating the simple meal of corn cakes and dried meat provided by the young woman. But reason can become a prison when it blinds us to new possibilities. Swift Arrow followed her gaze. "I did what was necessary." "You did what was right," the old woman corrected. "There is a difference." She switched back to English. "You should go prepare for the council. I will watch over them." Swift Arrow hesitated, looking at Sarah. "I will speak for you and your children. The council must understand why you are here." Sarah rose, moving closer to him. "What can I do?" "What should I say if they ask me questions?" "Speak your truth," he advised. "Our people value honesty above smooth words." He glanced at Singing Bird, who was now showing Catherine a small wooden doll, the little girl's eyes wide with fascination. "Singing Bird will guide you." "They won't separate us?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to ensure the children wouldn't hear her fear. "My children?" "No," Swift Arrow said firmly. "Whatever the council decides, you will remain together." The certainty in his voice steadied her. "Thank you for everything you've done." Something passed between them then, a moment of connection that transcended their different worlds. Swift Arrow inclined his head slightly, then turned and left the wickiup, his shoulders set with purpose. Singing Bird, who had missed nothing of the exchange, smiled to herself as she continued to entertain Catherine with stories of the wooden doll's adventures. The paths of these lives had been drawn together by forces beyond simple chance, she believed. Now it remained to be seen what pattern they would weave. The council fire cast long shadows across the faces of those gathered in the circle. 13 elders, 7 men and 6 women, sat in positions that reflected their standing within the tribe. Black Mountain occupied the place of honor directly across from Swift Arrow, who stood alone in the center of the circle, behind the seated elders. Much of the village had gathered to witness the proceedings, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Sarah watched from the edge of the gathering, where Singing Bird had instructed her to wait with the children. James stood rigid beside her, his young face solemn as he observed the formal proceedings. Emma and Catherine sat cross-legged at Sarah's feet, while Thomas had finally surrendered to exhaustion, sleeping with his head in his mother's lap. The council began with ritual, prayers offered to the 4 directions, smoke from a sacred pipe rising toward the darkening sky, words spoken in the Apache language that Sarah couldn't understand but recognized as invoking something greater than those present. Despite her exhaustion and anxiety, she found herself moved by the ceremony's dignity. Black Mountain spoke first, his deep voice carrying easily to all present. He alternated between Apache and English, seemingly for Sarah's benefit, though his tone suggested this was no kindness. "Swift Arrow has brought strangers to our village without council approval," he began. "White settlers whose problems are not our concern. We have suffered drought for 2 seasons. Game is scarce. Our children need every drop of water, every morsel of food." His gaze swept to Sarah and her children. Why should we share with those whose people have taken so much from us already?" Murmurs of agreement rose from many in the crowd. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but the depth of resentment was palpable. Swift Arrow waited until the murmurs subsided before responding, his voice steady and measured. "The woman is Sarah Thornton. Her husband was killed by the Reyes gang, the same outlaws who crossed our hunting grounds and killed 2 hawks and his son last moon." He paused, allowing the connection to register. "They burned her home, stole what little she had. She and her children were hiding in an abandoned mining outpost with no food, little water. The outlaws would have found them eventually." An older woman with a face deeply lined by years in the sun spoke next. Why did you not simply guide them to the nearest white settlement? Why bring them here, to our home?" "The nearest settlement is 4 days' journey," Swift Arrow replied. "The Reyes gang controls the routes between. The woman and her children would not have survived." "That is unfortunate," Black Mountain said, "but not our burden to bear." Swift Arrow's eyes flashed. "Brit, when did the Apache begin to measure compassion like traders counting coins? Our ancestors taught that we must judge each soul by its own merit, not by the crimes of others who share its appearance." "Our ancestors did not face extinction," another elder countered. "We fight for our very survival against those who would see us dead or imprisoned on barren reservations." The debate continued, voices rising and falling like the wind through canyon walls. Some spoke of old traditions of hospitality, others of bitter lessons learned through decades of broken treaties and betrayal. Through it all, Swift Arrow stood unwavering, neither raising his voice nor backing down. Finally, a weathered man whom Sarah hadn't noticed before raised his hand for silence. Unlike the others, he wore no adornments, his clothing simple, his only distinction a necklace of bear claws that gleamed dully in the firelight. "I would hear from the woman herself," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for one with such a formidable appearance. "Let her speak to us with her own voice." All eyes turned to Sarah. James squeezed her hand once before she carefully shifted Thomas into Emma's arms and rose to her feet. Swift Arrow nodded encouragement as she stepped forward to stand beside him in the circle's center. "I am Sarah Thornton," she began, willing her voice not to tremble. "Well, my husband William and I came west because he believed in building a life where people could live according to their conscience, not the prejudices of others." She glanced at her children. "He taught our children that all people deserve respect, regardless of where they come from or the color of their skin. He tried to deal fairly with everyone he met." She took a breath, steadying herself. The men who killed him didn't care about his beliefs. They wanted what little we had, and they were willing to murder for it. They would have killed my children too, had Swift Arrow not found us and helped us. She looked directly at Black Mountain. "I understand your caution. In your position, I might feel the same, but I ask you to judge us as individuals, not as representatives of all white settlers." The elder with the bear claw necklace leaned forward. "And if we offer shelter, what do you bring to our people in return? We cannot afford charity in these difficult times." Sarah hadn't expected this question. She glanced at Swift Arrow, whose expression gave nothing away. This was her challenge to meet. "I have skills," she said after a moment's consideration. "I can sew, cook, tend livestock. Before I married, I assisted my father, who was a doctor. I have knowledge of medicines and treating illness." A ripple of interest passed through the circle at this last statement. Singing Bird, who had remained silent until now, spoke up from her place among the elders. "Our people face sickness that our traditional remedies cannot always cure," the old woman said. "Knowledge of other healing ways could benefit many." "Words are easily spoken," Black Mountain countered. "How do we know her claims are true?" "I can prove it," Sarah said, her confidence growing. "I noticed several in your village suffering from coughs. I recognize the symptoms. I can prepare remedies that might help if you would allow me to gather the necessary plants." Swift Arrow's eyes showed a flicker of approval, but his voice remained neutral as he addressed the council. "The woman speaks truth about her husband. He was known to traders as a fair man who sought understanding with all peoples. His death at the hands of outlaws is a loss even for those who never met him." The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable to Sarah. Finally, Black Mountain spoke again. "Even if we believe your words, there is another matter to consider." His gaze fixed on the children. 4 young ones require much care, much food. What guarantee do we have that you will not bring more trouble to our people? The white man's law may come searching for you." "No one is searching for us," Sarah assured him. "My husband's only family was a brother who died in the war. My cousin in Phoenix might wonder what became of us, but he has no means to search. As for the authorities..." She hesitated. "They have shown little interest in justice for settlers on the frontier, especially when it's the Reyes gang doing the killing." The elder with the bear claw necklace, whose name Sarah had gathered, was Running Wolf, nodded slowly. "This, unfortunately, rings true. The white man's justice seldom extends to our lands, except when they themselves are the victims." Singing Bird raised her hand, commanding attention despite her frail appearance. "And I have looked into this woman's eyes. There is no deception there, and the children..." Her gaze softened as it fell on Thomas, still sleeping in Emma's arms. "They have suffered enough. To turn them away would darken our own spirits." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, judging, measuring, deciding her family's fate. She stood straight, meeting their gazes without flinching. At last, Black Mountain spoke. The council will deliberate. Swift Arrow, take the woman and her children back to Singing Bird's dwelling. We will summon you when we have reached our decision. As they walked away from the council fire, Sarah's legs felt suddenly weak with the release of tension. Swift Arrow steadied her with a hand beneath her elbow, the brief contact grounding her. "You spoke well," he said quietly. "Or do you think they'll help us?" she asked, glancing back at the somber circle of elders now deep in discussion. Swift Arrow's expression was guarded. "They will help you," he replied, "but there will be conditions. There is always a price." "What kind of price?" Sarah asked, a new worry creeping into her heart. "That," Swift Arrow said, looking toward the star-filled sky, "we will discover soon enough." Night had settled fully over the village by the time the summons came. Sarah had managed to get all 4 children to sleep on the mats Singing Bird had provided, their small bodies curled together like puppies, seeking comfort in closeness. When a young Apache man appeared at the Wikiup's entrance, Sarah rose carefully so as not to wake them. "The council has reached its decision," Swift Arrow said, materializing from the shadows outside. "They wish to speak with you alone." Sarah hesitated, glancing back at her sleeping children. "They will be safe," Singing Bird assured her from where she sat, grinding herbs with a stone mortar. "My granddaughter will watch over them." A young woman whom Sarah hadn't noticed before nodded from her place near the dwelling's far wall. "Thank you," Sarah said, drawing a deep breath to steady herself before following Swift Arrow back to the council fire. The scene appeared much as it had earlier, though the mood seemed heavier, more solemn. The elders sat in the same positions, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. The crowd of observers had thinned somewhat, but those who remained watched with unwavering attention. Black Mountain gestured for Sarah to stand in the center of the circle. Swift Arrow moved to join her, but the elder stopped him with a raised hand. "The council speaks to the woman," he said firmly. "You have had your say, Swift Arrow." For a moment, Sarah thought Swift Arrow might protest, but after a brief hesitation, he stepped back, though he remained closer than protocol might dictate. Black Mountain turned his attention to Sarah. "We have deliberated long on this matter. It is not our custom to welcome outsiders, especially in times of hardship." Sarah's heart sank, but she maintained her composure, her back straight, her gaze steady. "However," the elder continued, "we also cannot ignore our oldest laws of hospitality and protection. To turn away children in need would bring dishonor to our people." A flicker of hope rose in Sarah's chest. "The council has decided that you and your children may remain in our village," Black Mountain announced, "but there are conditions." "I understand," Sarah said, relief washing through her even as she braced for whatever requirements would follow. Running Wolf spoke next, his deep voice resonant in the night air. "First, you will share your knowledge of medicine with Singing Bird. Our people have suffered from sicknesses brought by white settlers, illnesses our traditional remedies cannot always heal. You will teach her what you know of these treatments." Sarah nodded. "Gladly. I'm not a trained doctor, but I'll share everything I've learned." "Second," continued a female elder whose name Sarah didn't know, "you will contribute to the village as any woman would. You will help with the gathering of food, the preparation of meals, the making of clothing. You will not be given special treatment because of your pale skin." "I would expect nothing less," Sarah assured her. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Black Mountain leaned forward, his expression stern. "Third, and most important, while you are under our protection, you live by our ways. Your children will learn our language, our customs, our beliefs. They will respect our traditions. Sarah felt a momentary unease. She had no objection to her children learning Apache ways, but the phrasing suggested something more absolute. They will learn with respect, she said carefully, but they must also remember their father's teachings and their own heritage. A murmur rose from some of the elders, but Singing Bird, who had entered the circle silently during the proceedings, raised her hand. "The children will be richer for knowing both ways," the old woman said. "This is wisdom, not defiance." Black Mountain's expression remained severe, but he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "There is one final condition," he said, his gaze shifting briefly to Swift Arrow before returning to Sarah. "The one who brought you here must accept responsibility for you and your children. If you break our trust, if you bring harm to our people, he will bear the consequences alongside you." Sarah turned to look at Swift Arrow, stunned by this requirement. It seemed profoundly unfair to place such a burden on him after he had already risked so much on their behalf. Swift Arrow's expression revealed nothing as he stepped forward. "I accept this responsibility," he said without hesitation. "Wait," Sarah protested. "That's not right. My actions are my own. Swift Arrow shouldn't be held accountable." "It is our way," Black Mountain interrupted. "One who brings outsiders vouches for them with his honor, his standing, his life if necessary." His eyes narrowed. "Do you refuse our terms?" Sarah felt trapped between gratitude and guilt. To refuse meant rejection for her children, a dangerous journey to an uncertain destination. To accept meant potentially endangering the man who had saved them all. Swift Arrow moved to stand beside her. "The terms are fair," he said quietly. "I brought you here knowing what might be asked." Sarah searched his face, finding only certainty in his dark eyes. "Why would you take such a risk for us?" For the first time since she had met him, Swift Arrow's stoic expression softened, revealing something vulnerable beneath. "Because there are some burdens too heavy to carry alone," he said simply. "You have carried yours far enough." The quiet dignity in his words touched something deep within Sarah, a place where grief and strength, desperation and hope had become hopelessly entangled since William's death. In Swift Arrow's steady gaze, she found not pity but understanding, not charity but respect. She turned back to the council. "I accept your terms with gratitude and humility." Black Mountain nodded once. "Then it is decided. You and your children will stay in the dwelling next to Singing Birds. Swift Arrow will show you our ways." He rose to his feet, signaling the council's conclusion. "May this decision bring harmony rather than discord to our people." As the gathering dispersed, Sarah remained standing by the fire, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just transpired. In less than a week, her entire world had been destroyed and rebuilt in a form she could never have imagined. "Are you well?" Swift Arrow asked, noticing her pallor in the firelight. "Just trying to comprehend it all," she admitted. "And 1 week ago, I was a rancher's wife in a wooden house with glass windows. Now I'm..." She gestured helplessly at their surroundings. "Now you are a survivor," Singing Bird said, approaching them with her characteristic unhurried grace. "Like all who dwell here, this is what binds you to us more than any council decision." Sarah nodded, recognizing the truth in the old woman's words. "I'm grateful, truly. But I never meant to place such a burden on Swift Arrow." Singing Bird's eyes twinkled with unexpected humor. "He has carried heavier loads with less purpose." She patted Sarah's arm. "Come, your children will wake confused if you are not there." As they walked back towards Singing Bird's dwelling, the old woman led the way, leaving Sarah and Swift Arrow to follow side by side. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said quietly. "There is no need," he replied. "You would have done the same for any child in danger." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but few would have done what you did for a stranger's children." She looked up at him. "The Council's condition, being responsible for us, that's a serious obligation." Swift Arrow was silent for several steps before responding. "After my wife and son were killed, I lived only for revenge. I hunted those responsible until none remained." His voice remained even, but Sarah heard the cost of such memories in its depths. "When it was done, I felt hollow. Singing Bird told me that a warrior who lives only for death becomes a shadow, not a man." They had reached the dwelling where Sarah's children slept, but neither made a move to enter. "I have been that shadow for many seasons," Swift Arrow continued. "Perhaps helping your family is the path back to becoming a man again." The vulnerability in this admission touched Sarah deeply. She reached out, briefly placing her hand on his arm, a gesture that crossed the boundaries of their different worlds. "Then we help each other," she said softly, "and neither of us walks alone." Swift Arrow looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in the vast wilderness of grief and survival. "Rest now," he said, gently stepping back. "Tomorrow, you begin your new life here." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had been held at bay only by necessity and worry. "Good night, Swift Arrow." As she turned to enter the wiki-up, his voice stopped her once more. "Among my people, I am called Swift Arrow," he said. "But my true name, given by my father, is Talasi. It means corn pollen, the substance that brings new life." The sharing of his personal name was a gift, Sarah understood, a token of trust as significant as any council decision. "Well, good night, Talasi," she said, the name feeling right on her tongue, like a promise of something not yet formed but already taking root. Days melted into weeks as summer's fierce heat gradually yielded to the gentler warmth of early autumn. For the Thornton family, each sunrise brought new lessons in survival and belonging in a world vastly different from the one they had known. Sarah spent her mornings with Singing Bird, the two women creating a bridge between different healing traditions. They sat in the shade of a large cottonwood tree at the village's edge, surrounded by plants, powders, and tinctures from both cultures. "This is willow bark," Sarah explained, breaking a small piece and passing it to the elder. "My father used it for fevers and pain. It works much like your desert willow, but is stronger for some ailments." Singing Bird examined it with fingers that, despite their age, moved with precision born of decades of healing work. "And this," she responded, offering Sarah a small clay pot of greenish salve, "draws infection from wounds better than your poultices." Their exchange of knowledge had already borne fruit. 3 children suffering from a lingering cough had improved after treatment with a combination of Sarah's honey and herb mixture and Singing Bird's traditional steam therapy. A young warrior's infected wound had healed cleanly using Sarah's knowledge of cleansing techniques and Singing Bird's drawing salve, but their conversations went beyond medicine. As they worked, they shared stories of their peoples, their families, their beliefs about life and death. Sarah learned that Singing Bird had once saved Swift Arrow's life after finding him nearly dead from grief and wounds following the massacre of his family. He was like a son without a mother, a warrior without a purpose, the old woman explained one day as they sorted healing plants. "His body I could heal, but his spirit," she shook her head slowly. "Some wounds leave scars we cannot see." Sarah thought of the quiet dignity with which Swift Arrow carried himself, the gentleness he showed her children despite the hardness life had forced upon him. "He's a good man," she said softly. Singing Bird's knowing eyes studied Sarah's face. "Yes, and he begins to remember this since you came." The children adapted with the remarkable resilience of youth. Emma and Catherine had quickly become favorites among the Apache women who delighted in teaching them to weave baskets and grind corn. The girls absorbed the new language with an ease that astonished Sarah, often chattering phrases she couldn't yet understand. Thomas, at 4-day, was adopted as a sort of communal project by the village. He followed the older children like a puppy, returning each evening covered in dust, but glowing with excitement over new discoveries. Already he could count to 20 in Apache and knew the names of every animal in the surrounding hills. James's transition had been the most profound. Swift Arrow had taken a particular interest in the boy, seeming to recognize in him a kindred spirit, someone forced to grow up too quickly by circumstance. He taught James to track game, to move silently through the desert, to read the sky and stars. The boy who had arrived in the village, guarded and suspicious now, stood straighter, his eyes clearer, his voice more confident. One evening, Sarah watched from the doorway of their wickiup as Swift Arrow demonstrated to James how to fletch an arrow. The boy's face was a study in concentration as his fingers, still clumsy with the unfamiliar task, attempted to bind the feather to the shaft with sinew thread. "Like this," Swift Arrow said, his large hands gently correcting the boy's grip. "The binding must be tight but not crush the shaft." James nodded, adjusting his technique. When he successfully completed the task, the smile Swift Arrow gave him contained a pride that brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. It was the look William should have been giving his son, the approval of a father figure that James so desperately needed. "You're good with him," Sarah said later, after James had gone to join the other children for a storytelling session around the communal fire. Swift Arrow and Sarah sat outside her dwelling, the desert night cool around them. Over recent weeks, these evening conversations had become a ritual neither acknowledged but both anticipated. "He has a good heart," Swift Arrow replied, "a strong spirit like his mother." The compliment, delivered in his characteristic straightforward manner, warmed Sarah more than it should have. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how comfortable she had become in his presence. "The children are happy here," she said, "happier than I would have thought possible after—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Swift Arrow nodded. "Children are wise. They see the truth beneath the surface." He hesitated, then added, "And you? Are you finding peace here?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah considered it honestly before answering. "I still wake sometimes thinking I'm in my bed at the ranch, expecting to hear William moving about, but—" She looked toward the village center where lanterns glowed and voices murmured. "Yes, there is peace here, a different kind than I knew before, but real." Swift Arrow's expression softened in the lamplight. "You have shown great courage. Many would have broken under such loss." "I didn't have the luxury of breaking," Sarah said simply. "The children needed me whole, and now?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to address. Before Sarah could formulate a response, shouts erupted from the village entrance. Both were on their feet instantly, Swift Arrow's hand moving to the knife at his belt. Running Wolf appeared, his normally composed features tense with urgency. "Riders approaching from the south," he reported in Apache, then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. "Armed men, many." Swift Arrow's expression hardened. "The Reyes gang. We cannot be sure, night obscures them, but they move with purpose toward our valley." Sarah felt a cold fear grip her heart. My children. Gather them, Swift Arrow instructed. Bring them to the meeting cave. It is defensible if needed. As Sarah hurried to collect her children from the storytelling circle, the village erupted into controlled activity. Warriors readied weapons while women gathered essentials, all moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to threat. Inside the large cave that served as the tribe's gathering place during extreme weather, families settled into designated areas. Singing Bird organized the elders and children in the deepest section, while warriors positioned themselves near the entrance. Sarah huddled with her children in a small alcove, Thomas clutching her skirts, while the older three maintained brave faces despite their fear. James held the small knife Swift Arrow had recently given him, his knuckles white around its handle. "Is it them?" he asked, his voice steady despite his pale face. "The men who killed Father?" Sarah pulled him close. "We don't know yet, but we're safe here. Swift Arrow and the others will protect us." As if summoned by her words, Swift Arrow appeared at their alcove, his expression grave. "The scouts report 12 riders. They carried torches and rifles. The Reyes gang had 8 men when they attacked our home," Sarah said, her mind racing. "They could have recruited more." Swift Arrow nodded. "The Black Mountain believes they have tracked you here. Perhaps they learned of your survival from someone at the mining outpost." "What will happen now?" Sarah asked, glancing at her children's worried faces. "The council is meeting now. Some believe we should attack first from the shadows. Others wish to negotiate." His jaw tightened. "There are those who think we should give them what they seek. Us," Sarah whispered, understanding immediately, "to avoid bringing trouble to the village." Swift Arrow's eyes flashed dangerously. "That will not happen," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I have given my word, my protection." The intensity in his voice sent a shiver through Sarah that had nothing to do with fear. Before she could respond, Black Mountain appeared at the cave entrance, summoning Swift Arrow to the council. "Stay with your children," Swift Arrow told her. "I will return when a decision is made." Sarah nodded, watching him go with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. As much as she trusted Swift Arrow's commitment to protecting her family, she understood the impossible position her presence had created for him. She was asking him to put his standing, perhaps even his life, at risk for outsiders. Singing Bird approached, settling beside Sarah with a groan that spoke of aging joints and weary bones. "The council debates," she said, "but some decisions are made in the heart before words are spoken." "I never meant to bring danger to your people," Sarah said, guilt washing over her. "Danger finds all peoples, regardless of intention," the old woman replied. "What matters is how we face it." She glanced at the children, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and dozed fitfully against their mother. "You have given us gifts beyond medicine, Sarah Thornton. You have reminded some of us what we fight to preserve, not just land and tradition, but compassion, honor, the innocence of children." She took Sarah's hand in her gnarled one. "Whatever comes with the dawn, know that you and your little ones have touched this village in ways that will remain after you are gone, whether that is tomorrow or many seasons from now." The old woman's words, clearly meant as comfort, struck Sarah with the force of revelation. In the weeks since arriving at the village, she had thought primarily of what the Apache had given her family: shelter, protection, a new beginning. But there had been a reciprocal gift as well, one she was only now beginning to understand. Through her children's innocent acceptance of new ways, through her own sharing of knowledge, through the simple act of trusting when all evidence argued against it, perhaps she had offered something valuable to this community that had seen too much betrayal, too much loss. Outside the cave, voices rose and fell as the council debated their fate. Inside, Sarah held her sleeping children and made a silent promise. Whatever dawn brought, she would face it with the courage and dignity she had learned from these people who had become so much more than reluctant hosts. And as the night deepened around them, Sarah found herself praying, not just for her family's safety, but for Swift Arrow, the man who stood between two worlds, defending a vision of compassion that transcended the boundaries of skin and history. Dawn broke over the mountains in ribbons of gold and crimson, casting long shadows across the valley. Sarah stood at the mouth of the cave, her children close beside her, watching as Swift Arrow and Black Mountain approached the line of mounted men who had taken position at the edge of the village. The council's debate had continued through most of the night, voices rising and falling like the desert wind. In the end, they had reached a compromise. They would neither attack first nor surrender the Thorntons. They would face the intruders openly, presenting a united front while seeking to understand the true purpose behind this incursion. "I should be down there," Sarah said, her voice tight with anxiety. "If it's the Reyes gang, if they've come for us." "Your place is with your children," Singing Bird replied firmly, her frail hand surprisingly strong on Sarah's arm. "Swift Arrow speaks for you now." It is what the council decided. Sarah watched as the two Apache leaders stopped some 30 paces from the mounted men. Even from this distance, she could see that Swift Arrow carried himself with calm dignity, his back straight, his movements deliberate. "It's not them," James said suddenly, squinting in the morning light. "Those aren't the men who attacked our ranch." Sarah looked more closely at the riders. The boy was right. These men wore the dust-covered uniforms of the U.S. cavalry, not the mismatched clothing of bandits. Their leader, distinguished by his insignia, sat his horse with military bearing as he addressed the Apache representatives. "The army," she breathed, a new fear replacing the old. The complex history between the Apache and the U.S. military was written in blood and broken promises. Their presence here could mean many things, none of them likely to favor the village. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the conversation below continued. Finally, Swift Arrow turned and began walking back toward the cave, his expression unreadable. Black Mountain remained with the soldiers, his posture rigid with barely contained tension. When Swift Arrow reached them, his eyes sought Sarah's immediately. "It is not the Reyes gang," he confirmed. "It is a patrol from Fort Bowie, led by a Captain Richards. They are tracking the gang." "Tracking them?" Sarah repeated, surprised. "Why?" "The Reyes gang attacked a stagecoach 3 days ago. The governor's nephew was among those killed." A grim satisfaction flickered across Swift Arrow's features. "And it seems even white justice can be awakened when the victim is important enough." Hope surged in Sarah's chest. "Then, they might actually bring those men to justice for all their crimes." "Perhaps." Swift Arrow's expression softened as he looked at the children. They found bodies at a camp in the desert, Vicente Reyes and 3 of his men. "Dead?" James asked, his young voice steady despite the gravity of the question. Swift Arrow nodded. "Killed by Apache arrows, according to the captain. The remaining gang members have fled south toward Mexico." Sarah's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "You went back," she said, realization dawning. "After bringing us here, you tracked them down." Swift Arrow met her gaze without apology. "Justice was owed to your husband, to my people, whom they had harmed." Something in his eyes told Sarah there was more to this story, perhaps a personal reckoning that had been necessary for his own peace, but now was not the time to press for details. "What happens now?" she asked, glancing toward the soldiers who remained at a distance, watching the village with obvious wariness. "They wish to speak with you," Swift Arrow replied. "To confirm your identity, to learn what you know of the Reyes gang. The captain seems reasonable for a blue coat. He has given his word that you and your children will not be forced to leave if that is not your wish." Sarah absorbed this, weighing implications and possibilities. "And the council, what is their position?" "Divided, as always," Swift Arrow said with the ghost of a smile. "But Black Mountain has acknowledged that your presence here is no longer a secret to be kept. The choice of whether to stay or go must be yours now." The magnitude of this statement was not lost on Sarah. For the Apache to grant her such agency, such freedom of choice, represented a level of acceptance she had hardly dared hope for. "I need to speak with my children first," she said. "This affects all of us." Swift Arrow nodded, respecting her decision. "I will tell the captain you will come when you are ready." As he walked back toward the waiting soldiers, Sarah gathered her children in a small circle away from curious ears. "The army officers want to talk to us," she explained gently. "They're hunting the bad men who hurt Father and burned our home." "Are they going to take us away?" Catherine asked, her small face pinched with worry. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "Not unless we want to go. We have a choice to make, all of us together." She looked at each child in turn. "We could go to Phoenix, to Cousin Daniel's as we originally planned. Or we could stay here, with Swift Arrow and Singing Bird and the others who have helped us." Emma's eyes widened. "We can really stay, forever." "If that's what we decide is best," Sarah confirmed. "But I want to know how each of you feels." Thomas, predictably, spoke first. "I want to stay. I'm learning to be an Apache warrior." He puffed out his little chest, earning a smile from his mother, despite the seriousness of the moment. Catherine nodded vigorously. "I like it here. The ladies are teaching me to make pretty baskets, and I have friends now." Emma was more thoughtful. "I miss having a proper house sometimes," she admitted, "and books, but I feel safe here, like we belong even though we're different." Sarah turned to James, whose opinion, she knew, would carry particular weight. At 12, he stood on the threshold between childhood and the man he would become. The path they chose now would shape that journey irrevocably. James was quiet for a long moment, his young face solemn with the responsibility of the decision. "Father always said home isn't a place," he finally said. "It's where the people who care about you are." He looked toward where Swift Arrow stood talking with the army captain. "He cares about us." "They all do, in their way, even Black Mountain, though he tries to hide it." A small smile touched his lips. "Besides, I still have a lot to learn from Swift Arrow." Pride and love swelled in Sarah's heart as she looked at her son, this child who had endured so much yet maintained such wisdom and grace. "Then we are agreed," she said, gathering them all in a brief embrace. "We will stay." When Sarah approached the meeting between Swift Arrow and Captain Richards, she carried herself with quiet confidence. The captain, a weathered man with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed mustache, tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Thornton," he greeted her, "I'm relieved to find you and your children alive and well. When we found the remains of your homestead, we feared the worst. We would have perished if not for Swift Arrow," Sarah replied candidly. "He found us, protected us, brought us here when we had nowhere else to go." The captain's eyes flickered between Sarah and the Apache warrior, clearly puzzled by the unexpected alliance. "I see," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't see at all. Well, I can arrange escort for you and your children to the fort, and from there to Phoenix, if that's your destination. Your cousin Daniel Thornton has made inquiries about your whereabouts. That's very kind, Captain, Sarah said, but we've decided to remain here. The statement clearly caught the officer by surprise. Remain, Mrs. Thornton, with all due respect. This is an Apache village. Surely you don't intend— I do intend, Sarah interrupted firmly. My children are safe and happy here. We've been welcomed, given shelter and protection when we had nothing. This is our home now. Captain Richards looked genuinely concerned. Mrs. Thornton, I understand you've endured a terrible ordeal, but this decision seems hasty. Perhaps with time to consider— It is not hasty, Swift Arrow interjected, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Sarah Thornton has lived among us for many weeks. She has earned the respect of our council, shared her knowledge of medicine with our healers. Her children learn our ways while we learn from them. His gaze was steady as he added, They are under my personal protection. The captain studied them both for a long moment, clearly reassessing his understanding of the situation. I see, he said again, and this time Sarah thought perhaps he truly did. Well, that is unusual, but not without precedent, I suppose. He cleared his throat. In any case, I'll need your testimony about the Reyes gang, anything you can tell us that might help bring the remaining members to justice. Of course, Sarah agreed. I'll tell you everything I know. As the day progressed, Sarah provided her account of the attack on their ranch, careful to emphasize that Swift Arrow had acted entirely to protect her family, not out of any aggression toward settlers. The Apache Council, led by Black Mountain, negotiated terms with Captain Richards, ensuring that the Army's pursuit of the Reyes gang would not be used as a pretext for further incursions into their territory. By late afternoon, the soldiers had departed, carrying messages from Sarah to her cousin in Phoenix, assuring him of her family's safety and well-being. As the dust from their horses faded on the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of completion, one chapter of her life truly ending, another firmly begun. That evening, the village gathered for a celebration, not of victory in battle, but of a different kind of triumph. The Thornton children sat among their Apache friends, sharing food and laughter with the easy acceptance that seemed to come so naturally to the young. Emma and Catherine had flowers woven into their hair by the village women. Thomas demonstrated his growing prowess with a small bow, crafted specifically for his small hands. James sat with the young men, listening intently to their stories, occasionally adding observations that earned nods of approval. Singing Bird approached, where Sarah stood watching the festivities. Your decision has brought joy to many hearts, the old woman said, her eyes twinkling in the firelight, especially one who has known too little joy. Sarah followed her gaze to where Swift Arrow, Talassi, sat speaking with Running Wolf, his usual stoic expression softened by the warmth of the celebration. He has given us so much, Sarah said softly. I only hope we can repay that debt in time. Singing Bird made a dismissive sound. And there is no debt between hearts that recognize each other. She patted Sarah's hand. The path ahead will not always be smooth. There will be those who cannot understand the choice you have made. But remember this night, when two peoples became one family. As the celebration continued, Swift Arrow eventually made his way to Sarah's side. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dancers circling the fire. The children seem happy, he observed. They are, Sarah confirmed. We all are. Swift Arrow turned to face her fully. I have something for you, he said, reaching into a pouch at his waist. It is customary among my people to mark new beginnings. He held out his hand, revealing a bracelet of finely woven leather strands interspersed with small turquoise beads and silver elements that caught the firelight. "And it was my mother's," he explained as Sarah gasped softly. "She told me to give it to someone whose spirit matched its strength and beauty." Sarah's eyes met his, seeing in them a vulnerability that his warrior's demeanor rarely revealed. "Talasi," she whispered, using his true name. "I'm honored beyond words." As he fastened the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers lingered for a moment against her skin. "You have brought life back to this place," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the surrounding celebration. "To me." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. The grief for William would always be part of her, just as Talasi's loss would always be part of him. But in this moment, looking into his eyes, she understood that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding the courage to embrace a future you hadn't planned. "We found each other when we both needed it most," she said simply. "Perhaps that's no accident." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. "The Apache do not believe in accidents, Sarah Thornton. Only in paths that were meant to cross." As they turned back to watch her children, their children now, in a sense that transcended blood but honored responsibility, Sarah felt a peace settle over her that she had thought lost forever in the ashes of her former life. The desert night deepened around the village, stars appearing like distant beacons in the vast Arizona sky. In their light, two people from different worlds stood side by side, no longer divided by the boundaries that had shaped their pasts, but united by the future they had chosen together. And somewhere in that starlit night, Sarah thought she could feel William's blessing, a final gift from the man who had taught their children that courage often meant embracing the unexpected, and that family was defined by love, not circumstance. As Talasi's hand found hers in the darkness, Sarah knew with unshakable certainty that they had all found their way home.